Now, the recent release of this year's Brand Africa survey has caused quite a stir in the market, and to discuss the winners and losers in the survey and to help us understand how African brands compete on the global stage, while we are joined by our regular contributor and author of a book called Connect with the Continent, Terry Behan, and then the founder of Brand Africa, Thebe Ikalafeng, who recognise the importance of building a positive image for Africa through branding. They are here with us in studio. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Eben.
Always nice to have you with us, Terry. But let's start with you, Thebe. What is Brand Africa 100, Africa's best brands? What's it all about?
Well, Brand Africa was established in 2009, and it's an intergenerational movement to change the image of the continent, rather to create a positive image of the continent, to celebrate our diversity, and to drive the competitiveness of the continent. It's really an African initiative by Africans to create a great Africa.
Terry, why is the Brand Africa report so important for the continent within that context?
I think it's important because it tells us who the main players in the continent are from a branding point of view. It highlights the international brands, it highlights the Pan-African brands, and it very clearly, and more importantly, in a very definitive, measurable context, tells us their value, what they represent, what they stand for, and how the market views them.
What are some of the top African brands? And tell us, why is it so important to measure brands?
I'll start with the second question. It's important to measure brands because it's going to do three things. When a country or a continent is creating great brands, it enables the country to create jobs, because when those brands are thriving, it means jobs are being created. We desperately need jobs in the continent. The second thing is when those companies are thriving, they're able to pay taxes. If they retain the taxes in Africa. And those taxes will enable any country and the continent totally to be able to pay for the public goods, the roads, the education that we so desperately need. And third and most important, great brands help to create a positive image of the continent. We know who America is through the brands of America. We know who Europe is through the brands of Europe and Italy and France, etc. Those are the three most important reasons on why we should create brands. It helps us to pay our bills so that we can stop borrowing and stop blaming and stop begging.
You still haven't told me the top brands, but I'll get back to that now.
I'm very happy to discuss the top brands, African brands with you. No doubt, the definitive African brand is MTN, present in Africa in 17 countries, admired by Africans throughout the continent, because what MTN has been, it has been an enabler and a catalyst for Africans to be able to transact. So that's number one on the list. And then you've got Glo, which is a Nigerian brand, MTN's closest competitor in Nigeria, which obviously gives MTN a run for his money, not just in Nigeria, but also regionally within West Africa. And then you've got number three, Dangote. Now, Dangote is, again, the definitive industrial brand in Africa, investing $500 million in a cement factory in Ethiopia. To me, it speaks about an Africa that is rising and thriving.
That's the good news. But it comes down to investment, and it comes down to growth. What is the report or the survey, Terry, telling us about investment and growth in the African continent?
It tells two distinct stories. I think it talks very definitively around the growth of African brands and how they have grown, not just continentally, but globally over the last number of years. I think what has to be kind of couched with that is African brands are also still embryonic. They're still young. So they're still exposed to a lot of market risk. So when you have a situation where the oil price drops by 50% and that has a knock-on risk on tax, on consumer spending, you see then brands that are doing really well over the last decade taking a slight knock in the short term because they're very tied into local market requirements. Then conversely, you see global brands who are looking all over the world for growth and growth opportunities. And I think, with that exception, they've all zoned in on the continent as a way and as a means of increasing their growth and their sort of enhancement from a revenue point of view. I think the difference is what's good for us. Like Thebe said, African brands who invest in Africa and for the lion's share keep their tax revenue in Africa. International brands who invest in Africa, while incredibly powerful on the continent, are taking the majority of that benefits and the majority of that revenue offshore.
We should tax them before they take the money out of the continent, Terry. It almost sounds a little bit like colonialism.
But it's a big issue. I mean, it is an issue internationally. If you look at where I come from, in Ireland, it's been used as a tax haven by a lot of international companies. There's a big argument with companies like Google and with companies like Starbucks, who are shifting a significant amount of their revenue into offshore markets so they can repatriate that back to their home country. You know, African companies tend not to do that. They tend to invest and reinvest in their own markets.
I want to talk about the top brand, MTN, you mentioned. We've seen them embroiled in this massive scandal. Nigeria, South Africa, it's almost a diplomatic event that's going down. How's it affected them?
Well, probably on the financial end of it. I mean, we know they've lost about 20 to 25% of the share value on the stock exchange.
Yeah.
But in terms of what MTN's purpose is in Africa, that remains on track, serving over 200 million consumers around the continent. What customers ask every day, they ask the question, if I buy an MTN SIM card, can I call, can I transact? And that MTN is delivering on. So in terms of being the most admired brand in Africa, that will remain. But in terms of them being the most valuable brand, well, of course, value has got to do with the bottom line. So that will be impacted in that respect. Matter of fact, a quick survey which was done in Nigeria, which around the continent rather, post this controversy right now. The survey established that consumers, even Nigerians, particular consumers, are saying, you know what? Yeah, they should be punished for this transgression, but my phones are getting through, and that's what matters to me.
Yes.
I don't think any less of them, but in terms of a corporate entity, I think they should pay their bills and they should comply rather with the laws of the country. And I think even everybody, whether it's MTN, any other company, or even South Africa, the company itself, have made it very clear that whether you're a South African company or any other company doing business in anybody else's country, you must comply with the laws. That is an administrative controversy or administrative issue rather than a consumer issue. As far as consumers are concerned, MTN is the most admired brand.
Service, service, service. That's what people want. In conclusion, Terry, tell us about this time that we are in, the Made in Africa brands. Is it that time? Is it a good time?
I think we're in the African century. I mean, we're still at the beginning of it, so there's still plenty of time to see what's going to happen. But if you look at we always talk about the macroeconomic factors. We're coming close to 1 billion people. We've got economies that have, it's cut back, but we're still growing, aggregated at 3.7% for the next year. So the basic information is there. The world wants more. It makes sense to build our own brands. It makes sense to not, as I say, even, we don't outsource our salvation.
Yeah.
We want to build our own brands. We want to build our own heroes so that we can create more jobs, we can create more tax revenue, and companies can benefit and people can benefit.
I love the optimism that these gentlemen come, the African evangelists, I'm going to call them today. Thank you for joining us. That's where you can have a look at Africa's best brands. Of course, Thebe Ikalafeng is the founder of Brand Africa, and Terry is the author of Connect with the Continent. They constantly tell us about the African century. It is that time, but it is for us to make a contribution in our individual capacities as well. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning.
Eben, thank you so much for having us over.
Brilliant.